WHO Talk Show. To kick off today's show, without further ado, that is why we have our friend, our partner with us once again, Miss Erin O'Hare of Charlottesville Tomorrow fame. Erin, good to see you once again. How are you today?
I'm doing all right, Charles. It's always good to be here. Love coming in and, seeing what's new in the studio and getting to chat with you and other folks who are listening. I think I love radio. So it's always nice to come on.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. But you're trying to flatter us saying what's new. It's the same old digs,
Isn't it?
digs. But but thank you for being nice, though. I appreciate that.
Well, it's always a little different. Like, it depends on who's in, right? It's always someone different. You're always here, but different folks coming through, and I just love the variety. So it's nice to come in and meet new folks and feel the different vibes.
Yes, indeed. So, family, tell a friend, 'cause you don't want to miss today's show. And this is just the beginning. Later on, we're gonna be joined by none other than Joshua Renee of Spill Team. Excellent. That's right. Josh.
I do.
Excellent when it comes to communicating, all communication skills and training and teaching folks and inspiring people to be their authentic selves. Don't want to miss it. Middle, we have Freddie Jackson. That's Mr. Love No Ego of Love No Ego Foundation, talking about the mentoring and work that he has going on, because our youth and our families need it more than ever. But like I said, this hour, you heard the lovely voice of Miss Erin O'Hare, and she brought some friends along as well.
I did.
So before, so I'm sure everybody's been saying, they've been looking forward to this. And so before we even dig into the subject matter, so to speak, I want, you all on the line to introduce yourself, talking about none other than gentleman who was a fan favorite when he came on, Sunshine Mathon, and also we are joined by Miss Sarah Malpass. So, Sunshine, I'm going to kick it to you first to kind of break the ice for Sarah. Since this is her first time with us, so Sunshine, go ahead and reintroduce yourself to the people.
Sure thing. Good to see you, Charles. That was an inspiring opening overall. I really appreciated it. I'm Sunshine Mathon, the executive director at Piedmont Housing Alliance, and it seems like we're making this a regular thing, Charles.
Yes. And I definitely appreciate that, because we appreciate your work. So the more regular, the better. Thank you. Thank you for joining us again. And Miss Sarah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Malpass. I'm a resident of the Fifeville neighborhood and also a part of the Fifeville Neighborhood Association. Great to be with you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for sure. So, Erin, I'm going to kick it over to you right now, because, to formally introduce the business of why we're here, because the folks in the Fifeville neighborhood, the folks on Cherry Avenue, even more specifically, to get even more precise, has been in the news recently when it comes to property and land there, and as it relates to how we continue to grow as a city, what development, what resources may be needed for the neighborhood.
Yes.
As with always, sometimes it takes a little adjustment to get used to change. Sometimes it's just the change itself. Sometimes there's misunderstandings. But, again, being, here at IMHO, being a fan of, folks like Mr. Sunshine Mathon, and, and the way that he goes about his work when it comes to redevelopment.
Yeah.
Definitely are delighted to have you all with us. I wanted you, as the reporter with Charlottesville Tomorrow, to kind of bring us up to speed and to, give us the overview of your report. And then, we can't wait to hear from the folks, that are involved in the process, like Sunshine and Sarah. And before I kick it to you, I want people to know too, that this is the beginning of a series that Erin and I talked about, to keep folks informed. We also will have on residents of the community from both sides, those who may be totally pro and those who may not be so sure about things, how they think it could affect the community. And then city leaders in general, we want to have on with us too, on what this means for the city.
Yeah. And I am so glad that we could do a series, because it relates so deeply into what you all brought to us with your housing conversation at the Jefferson School a few weeks ago, your Can I Talk to You, Seville?
Thank you.
That was the kickoff event for that that series, right?
Yes, so, it was. And thank you for plugging it, because end of January, y'all stay tuned. End of January, we're going to have a second series of Can I Talk DC?
Yeah, but anyone who's interested in housing who missed that conversation, you should really go on to the IMHO and Vinegar Hill Facebook pages and watch that conversation. Sunshine was involved as well. And to my surprise, I don't know why I was surprised, but Fifeville came up. And these couple of stories that we're talking about today that I've been working on for a very long time, folks like Sunshine and Sarah and Anthony Woodard from Woodard Properties and his right-hand man, Chris, Carmelita, residents, everyone's been so patient with me. This has been months and months and months of reporting. So I just always want to thank the folks who share their stories and help me find information to fact check that information to put into stories. So none of this is just me, right? I just get to be the vector for, quite honestly, more than a dozen people's voices for these. So I'm just, I kind of get to compile them all together, but I'm glad that we have folks who are here to just speak on their own behalf, which is really important and something that you all do so well. So
thank you. And Angeli Shaw being, the new CEO over there, Charlottesville Tomorrow, I know how big of a fact checker she is. So I know she wasn't going to let you off the hook.
No. And I don't like to let myself off the hook. It's like the worst thing when someone has to, or when I get an email and someone's like, that's not right. I'm like, no, but it's important that I know.
Yeah.
So.
And I heard you mention Woodard Properties as well. I can't wait to speak more, with the leadership there, because for the simple fact of, it seems like when good has been done, whether it's been through Sunshine or others, when it comes to our neighborhoods and our communities, Woodard Properties, it seems to be a very reputable organization, so that's always good to see when you see landlords or property owners or whatnot who are well versed in the history of a community or of a neighborhood, and they take to mind the elements of of the quality of life here when it comes to what they provide. So, so definitely shouts out to Woodard Properties.
Yeah. And they're doing something really unusual, which is what we'll talk about. I've got a couple of things that I've brought in today. One is the Fifeville, what would you call it? The Fifeville edition of our Changing Charlottesville series. It's, I think I've been on to talk about Changing Charlottesville before. But I think, okay, I can hear myself in these. Okay. It's a very long series. I'm looking at each neighborhood in Charlottesville based on U.S. Census data that show a lot of the changes, as well as firsthand accounts from the neighborhoods. And what we're looking at, because this is what was available online, was data from 2013 to roughly present day. So I know that a lot of the changes that have happened in Fifeville have been going on for a really long time, and they are not all of them are completely reflected in this data because we didn't have available to us to crunch digitally the way that we did that information. So with that acknowledgement, I did speak with a lot of folks who've lived in the neighborhood for a long time, like Miss Marcia Johnson, Miss Rosa Ayers, Miss Carmelita, of course, Sarah herself, some young folks.
And you're talking about legends there, by the way. I just want you to know.
It's an honor to be able to interview them for these stories.
Yeah, I definitely want to shout them out and give them their flowers. Yeah. You're talking about pillars of, of this community.
Yeah, when I was chatting with Miss Marcia, I didn't know that JJ is her son. I was like, oh my gosh, I've interviewed him about his art in my previous life as a arts and culture reporter. Right. So that was a fun connection to make.
Yeah.
So excuse me, I'm just getting over some things, so I'm gonna have to clear my throat. But so in this Fifeville piece, it's, there's plenty of history in here, and I won't necessarily go over it because you can go online and read it. But Fifeville is one of the oldest and the most dense neighborhoods of Charlottesville. And like neighborhoods close to it, 10th and Page, Rose Hill, also historically Black neighborhoods, also historically lower income neighborhoods, they've seen a lot more changes than other neighborhoods in Charlottesville in the past few decades. And I'm always surprised a little bit when I get into these into the numbers, right? You hear a lot of stories, and I know that you all have heard them too and seen them, right? If you've lived in the area long enough, you've seen the changes. I remember when I moved to town 14 and a half years ago, I did my laundry at the laundromat in Fifeville, and that's gone. And I remember the neighborhood just looked really different. I remember people told me, don't go to Dice Street. And so, I mean, of course, that's like the first place I went because I was like, what? What are you talking about? But I remember that when I first moved here. And now it's very different. It's very different. And like I can see it visually. And then talking with long-time residents, they wouldn't be able to afford the homes that they have now. Like Miss Marcia was talking about that. And hopefully she'll be able to come on and share some of her own story too. But
yeah. Now, what I want to sort of insert there though, is that like that's crucial because you mentioned a laundromat.
Yes.
But it's important to think of how to some folks how trivial like a laundromat may be.
Right.
But to some folks, to others, it is a needed resource in the community. You know what I mean? It's a necessity.
It is.
Like, so those are the kind of things, that we're going to be talking about, when it comes to how we look at redevelopment, like what we keep, what we, and what we remove. And one other question for you too. Curious, like for the scope of this conversation, the folks who mentioned stay away from Dice Street, were they people of the neighborhood or people from outside? Of course.
Of course they weren't. Okay. Of course not.
I just wanted to clarify.
It was, I came here for grad school, and it was other folks at UVA who were like, just don't go to that area. That's like the bad area of town. And I lived on Grady Ave at the time. So they were also like, oh, that part of Grady. But then I babysat for a family down there, and I was like,
there you go.
Why won't Domino's bring a pizza here? It was very odd to me. I also grew up in a bigger city. I grew up in the Boston area. So it just, it was not what I expected.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, this is actually like, this is really cute and people are nice.
Right.
And then I realized what was going on. Is like, oh,
yeah,
this is racism.
Yeah.
And classism.
Right.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all relative, right? Coming from a bigger city to a smaller town, to you, it's like, I'm like, we have sort of bigger problems, but it's relative.
It's so relative. Yeah. And it's different. At the end of the day, it all affects people in negative ways. And it's our responsibility as neighbors to, I think, make it a better place to live for all of us. So that's kind of where I come from with all of my neighborhood reporting. So hopefully this series can help folks really understand some of the changes that are going on that we can't really see. You can see a coat of paint. You can see that different folks are living on the street, maybe younger people versus older folks, all of that. But it was really interesting and on a personal level, kind of frightening to see some of these changes. What we saw a lot in the Fifeville piece as we were looking in was, as folks know, displacement, right? We all know that anecdotally that people are being displaced from Fifeville, right? It's like you hear folks saying, well, my neighbor couldn't afford to live in the city because of property taxes, or their home was falling apart and they couldn't afford to fix it up. And then, so you hear about that, and there are folks who know that that's happening, and then it's a whole different thing to see it in the numbers, right? Right. So so
what's that look like?
Right. Yeah. So some of the things that are pretty significant for Fifeville, well, one, it has been and continues to be a majority Black neighborhood, which I was like, that's great. It's great to see that, because in other neighborhoods throughout the city, you've seen that switch. A majority Black neighborhood is now a majority white neighborhood. And then you see neighborhoods that have been majority white getting actually whiter. So it was interesting to see in Fifeville that I can hear so much better. Thank you. that Fifeville, is still a majority Black neighborhood, more than 50%. And then, the percentage of people from other racial and ethnic backgrounds, like Asian, not Hispanic or Latino, those populations are also growing as well. So you're seeing more diversity in Fifeville through that lens.
And like that's going to be a caveat to address when we get the city leaders in as well. because when I hear you talking, first thing that came to my mind is that then we have to consider things like predatory lending and things of that sort, because we know for a fact on how it's disproportionate when it comes to the, the resources given to a neighborhood, or the interest rates, or, like the property values, things like that, when it's a predominantly Black neighborhood. So, so then we're digging deeper into this crust, right?
Yeah. I can't wait for the city leaders to weigh in on that, because it's a huge thing that we have to think about. It's not just the transactions. There's all kinds of stuff underneath that. And another thing about Fifeville is that its overall population has grown significantly. So between 2013 and 2021, its overall population, according to the census, grew by more than 800 people. That's that's almost, what was it? Almost 1/4. That's huge. And then there were more homes, right? So there were 114 more homes in the neighborhood. I couldn't quite figure out where that came from. Like, there wasn't a huge development built. Maybe there are just, more places that are homes. I wasn't quite sure. But there's more homes, and the vacancy rate has dropped. So in 2013, about 12% of the neighborhood's households were vacant, which is a pretty high vacancy rate. But by 2021, the vacancy rate was under 5%. So that means that chances to live in Fifeville are also getting more scarce. So that means that folks who've lived in the neighborhood for a long time are going to have a harder time staying there if they want. And a lot of folks, I think, do want to stay there. That's where their families have been for a long time, based on the stories that I've heard.
The majority of people in Fifeville own their homes, or are they renting?
So 60% of Fifeville residents are renters. And 60%. That's a little higher than the city average, but city average is about half and half. So we have half renters, half homeowners. But the data does show that in the last few years, there have been small increases in the percentage of owner-occupied homes. So home ownership is rising in Fifeville, at least incrementally. We'll see if that trend continues.
And that's very interesting. You're talking about, again, historic neighborhood. So then that lends itself as to, like, well, some of it flight, like Black flight, to where folks, went into the county or whatever the case may be, and then now if you try to come back, then things are priced. So, or the 40% that may own, then like you said, then you run into a tax issue. On whether or not I can hold on to this property, and I want you to to get to the end of the data that you're mentioning, and then I want to get Sunshine and Sarah to chime in. But I'll let you finish.
Because what you were just saying actually is the thing that shocked me the most, and was what I think the biggest finding in combing through all this data, which I've done with the help of Evan Mitchell, who's a data scientist. We've been working on this project for 3 years. It was part of his senior capstone at UVA, and he was so invested in wanting to do a really great project for Charlottesville. So he's stuck on and has done all the graphs and has helped me understand the data. And so he's a huge part of this too. So thank you so much to Evan. So one thing that we found, so median household income going up across the board in Charlottesville. However, we looked at income distribution in every neighborhood. So in Fifeville, this paints a really crisp picture of how the neighborhood is changing financially, which means it's changing in all these other ways too. So in 2013, 10 years ago, Fifeville was pretty economically diverse. So household incomes were distributed pretty evenly across the spectrum. You had you can kind of see it here, right? Like, we have the less than $20,000 household income, 20,000 to about 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 100, and then 100,000 or more. So you can see that's relatively the same, but you have more households in the less than $20,000 a year income than any other income bracket. By 2021, which is 8 years later, more Fifeville households fell into the highest income bracket, earning $100,000 or more each year than any other. So it's flipped from the lowest income bracket that we measured to the highest. And that is huge. That doesn't mean that wages are going up. It means that people with more money are moving in, and people who make less money are leaving. They're being pushed out. So that to me was just I was like, this can't be right. Is there something wrong? Like this is a complete flip, but it's correct. And it really matches with what folks in the neighborhood are seeing.
Yeah.
So that was the big one for me. So knowing this, like I had this done a little while ago. And then when I started working on this piece about the 501 Cherry Ave proposed project and the agreement that they've entered into, which is so unusual, I was like, we have to run these together because they're so related. I think so many of the things that have come up in this piece that we're looking at with the data are they're the things that this project knows and they're looking at addressing directly. So that's why I was really glad that Sunshine and Sarah could come in and speak to some of that. So
absolutely. So and we do have a listener question as well. And so I will ask this in case you came across data within your research in Sunshine.
Oh, I did a lot.
And I know it, and Sarah could chime in as well. But the question is, if we know that certain communities were targeted for incarceration, why though? So the way I interpret it, and Max can interpret it as well, but is that part of the effect on a community is the incarceration rates and Black, particularly young Black men being targeted and whatnot. So did you come across data to where that played a part when it came to the makeup of the community?
We did not, but that is something I would really like to look into.
Okay, please do.
Yeah.
Please do. Okay, Max, and I'll kick it to Sunshine.
Is Fifeville mainly composed of single-family homes, or these? And forgive me for just not knowing all the details, but single-family homes or big developments where we have apartment complexes or whatnot.
Sure. So Fifeville is mainly single-family homes.
Okay.
The parameters are, it goes from like Ridge Street, where Tonsler Park is. Like Ridge Street kind of forms one of the boundaries. And there's like that side up over like Prospect and the Greenstone, Orangedale areas. That is also Fifeville. It goes out to about Forest Hills Park. And then it's also hemmed in by West Main Street. Okay. So when you think about those, it's a lot of older homes, like on the Cherry Avenue corridor. Those homes are like pretty old. They're some of the oldest in the city. They're like built in the 1890s or so. And then once you get out a little further, you've got like the duplexes on Prospect and Orangedale up there.
So is Fifeville a design control district?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Okay.
Sunshine might know the answer. Sarah.
And then do we know how the proposed zoning ordinance will affect the Fifeville neighborhood?
Yes.
And I don't know if I'm jumping ahead.
No, that's okay.
Well, I definitely want Sunshine and Sarah to chime in, but those are great questions.
Yeah, it is. I think so. I actually have another story that I hope will run tomorrow, but there's a proposed district in the new ordinance called RNA zoning. And the idea for that is that it's intended to be an anti-displacement measure. And most of Fifeville is that zoning. It's a little complex, but it doesn't freeze the zoning. It just says it's trying to prevent tear downs of older homes that could just be repaired. The idea is you could, like, they don't want to, what is, like, I have to read that one over again, but they don't want to like take away wealth building opportunities from the families who are living in those neighborhoods, because how many times has that been done? Right. So they didn't want to make a policy.
That's always the catch.
Exactly. Right. So they didn't want to just upzone everything else in the city and keep these other neighborhoods like frozen so that people miss out on those opportunities. So this is a different look at that. So yes, most of Fifeville is the RNA zoning.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And family, once again, we are joined by none other than Charlottesville Tomorrow's Erin O'Hare, in her report on the redevelopment in the Fifeville neighborhood. And we are also joined by Sunshine Mathon of Piedmont Housing Alliance and Sarah Malpass of the Fifeville Neighborhood Association. So Sunshine and Sarah, after hearing all that, hearing Erin's synopsis of her report, hearing the data, even hearing a listener's question about communities like this being targeted by incarceration, I saw you taking notes. So I guess, Sunshine, I'll kick it to you first when it comes, and probably, like give your exact role in this when it comes to what we're discussing, the Fifeville development, and then your take on Aaron's report, what we discussed so far.
How long is your show?
Right. I mean, we're supposed to have the hour, but
yeah, there's a lot in there to talk about. But I'll just say shortly that we are partnering with Woodard Properties and a true partnership with the Fifeville Neighborhood Association and Sarah as a representative to look at the redevelopment of the 501 Cherry site, specifically through the lens of trying to keep as much affordability in the neighborhood as the neighborhood continues to change. And so that's the nature of it. So we're going to, the goal of that site as it currently is envisioned is around 70 apartment homes, some of which will be set aside for seniors, some of which will be for families. And they'll be at a range of incomes. The exact numbers are still being worked through because, frankly, how deep we can go in the affordability is driven by how much subsidy we can find. And so we work really, really hard to try to find as much as we can. But it takes time and it takes commitment from the city, from the state, from federal sources, et cetera, and from philanthropic sources too. So we put all those together to try to, basically what we do is we replace what would be otherwise be debt on a property that the property then has to pay. Instead, we replace it with subsidy so that we can keep the rents low as possible in perpetuity for forever. So those 70 homes will be on second to fourth story of 2 buildings, and on the ground floor are going to be partnerships with Music Resource Center, Twice as Nice, and hopefully a new grocery store as well. That'll be a neighborhood scale grocery, really, focused on serving the neighborhood needs.
Real quick, Sunshine, of those homes that you're talking about, what is the largest bedroom size, or what's the range of bedroom size that those?
So we're experimenting a little bit on this one. So normally we do 1 to 3 bedrooms. So we have some 1 bedrooms, some 2s, and some 3s, and we are experimenting with some studios as well this time.
Mm-hmm.
And partially because we know that a couple of things. One is that on the one building where we're going to focus serving seniors, we know some seniors actually do well in a studio context. Having a smaller unit can sometimes be a good thing. We're also going to be setting aside
only seniors or disabled as well.
That's exactly where I was going. So we're also setting aside a certain number of units to serve developmentally and physically disabled individuals as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those studios will also have a set aside for that population too.
And will the disabled population, forgive me if I'm offending anyone by not using the right terminology, will they have a preference over those that are can fall into the elderly category?
So there will be, I don't know the exact numbers of the distribution between the 70 units and how much are in the senior property versus the other, but let's just say it's half and half right now. So of the 35 units approximately in the senior building, we are still working through the numbers, but we'll probably have a preference for somewhere between 10 and 15% of those units for people with developmental disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, it'll be anyone 55 and older. And then anyone who has a disability, they can still occupy those other units, but there'll just be a preference for that first 10 or 15%.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we hear from Sarah, Sunshine, I had a question for you because you are involved in so many of these types of developments. I'm always curious about how you handle the conversation when it comes to the divide between people of color in particular, the ones that may be middle income, let's say, and ones that are considered low income or even at the poverty level. Like when it comes to explaining that this is a historically Black neighborhood, but there's chance for opportunity, and then we use, like the term affordable,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote affordable. Like, just give me some insight on this project in particular when it comes to having both sides of the argument, because I see it a lot, to where it can serve, say, Black families and Black community, but but we're not a monolith at the same time. Like, so kind of give me some insight on when you're explaining, development to the community.
So I'm going to say it in a similar way that we've talked about our partnership on Prospect Avenue for 5 townhomes that we're doing as home ownership there, which is different than this project, but the approach will be similar. Where in those 5 homes on Prospect Ave, we have a preference for a limited period of time. Fair housing still controls what we do, so we have to follow the law. But for a limited period of time, we have a preference for people who currently live in the neighborhood or who have been recently displaced, who lived there recently but had to move out because they couldn't afford to live there anymore. So we will do a similar thing as we work towards the lease up of when the 70 units are ready. We'll have a preference for a limited period of time, because we can't do it permanently. You can't do that under fair housing law. But we'll have for that period of time, for a limited period of time, where we will do outreach in partnership with the neighborhood association, with church groups, with the neighbors that we have ongoing relationships with. We'll do outreach so that folks in the neighborhood or folks that they know who have been recently displaced have an opportunity to kind of get the first look at it. And then after that point, per fair housing law, we have to it's first come, first serve. That being said, this goes back to the depth of affordability and the depth and breadth. So the depth is how deep can we go? How affordable can we get? And one of the things that I highlight every time is that every property that we own and operate accepts housing choice vouchers. So just right off the bat, we'll have 70 new homes, brand new, who, for those folks who have a housing choice voucher and are struggling to find something in the city, which many people are, will accept those housing choice vouchers. So that gets to the deepest levels of affordability and not on that front. We'll have a certain percentage of units dedicated and set aside for people with at 30% of the area median income and below. And what that translates to a little bit, it's a changing number, as Aaron was talking about, and I'll touch on that in a minute too. But that is, for households making, typically between say 15 and maybe 25,000 a year as a general range, and that's a household, not just necessarily an individual. And then we'll have some homes, some of those apartments set aside for people at 50% of the area median income, which again will be a range of probably that 25 to 50,000 a year. And then we'll have some homes set aside for people at 60% AMI up to say, maybe 60 or 65,000 a year. And the basic idea is that's the way that this kind of development is financed through the federal government, that we get what are called low income housing tax credits. That's the biggest financial tool that we have to work with. Mm-hmm. They work with us to set what those rents are based on those income tiers. So the biggest opportunity we have as a community to drive down that affordability is to invest more dollars in the project so that we can go lower in that affordability spectrum. Does that answer your question, Charles?
Yes. And you answered it more so later in your answer. And I'm hoping people picked up on it. And listeners, if we missed anything with that answer, please chime in and let us know. Because again, to me, you did, because I was getting to like that, like the heart of the conversation, right? Of when you have some Black residents that are saying, "Oh, I see how this is for us," and then you have other Black residents that are saying this is not for the Black community. You see what I'm saying? And Sarah may chime in on that as well, but I think Max had something for you.
Yeah, you mentioned that this particular project would be for those who who once lived in the neighborhood but couldn't moved out because they no longer could afford to. And so for me, the devil's in the details. And so do you mean could no longer afford to because they were evicted, because they lost their home, because they lived there as a child and just simply the parents could not afford to live there, so they decided to move or had to move?
Yeah, so we're not going to make any distinction between those. So basically we're going to say, if you essentially can show that you had to leave the neighborhood at some point or another for whatever reason that reason is, we're going to work with you to try to find a home at the community if we can make it work.
So eviction debt will not matter in terms of eligibility for housing.
So we always take in information when we do an intake for somebody. All of those play a factor. When there is eviction history, we have a conversation. It does not mean that they can't rent, but it does mean that we want to have a conversation to understand the circumstance to ensure that we don't get into a bind in the future for them or for us. So there's a conversation there, but it's not a no.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then before we move on, I got to go back to the bedroom sizes. I'm sorry. So in terms of like the 3-bedroom and studio apartments, how many people, because some of us have larger families. I, for one, the husband and 5 children in the house.
5?
So 5 kids. Well, one of them is not.
Yeah,
one's off in college. But so how many people to a 3-bedroom or to a studio if that, I guess, proposed project gets approved?
So good question. I don't know that I know the precise answer on the 3-bedroom. There are guidelines that we have to follow, but I think for a studio or 1-bedroom, it's 2 people. For a 2-bedroom, I believe it is 4 people, and for a 3-bedroom, and I'm saying this a little off the cuff here, so I'm not 100% certain. For a 3-bedroom, I think it's 6, maybe 7. But that is a question I'd have to come back on to answer for sure.
Yeah.
And
so we got some big families out there, and I
know, and I do want to highlight that not every project does it make sense to do every housing type. So we've never done a studio before, but we're trying studio apartments because we know there's a long list on the public housing choice voucher list that needs smaller units. So we're trying to address that issue. We're also trying to create as many units as possible. And there is an inherent balance point there between the larger the units we make, the less units we make. There's just a limited amount of square footage. So we have to operate within that envelope, and you have to make strategic choices. And in this context, in partnership with the neighborhood and talking it through with neighborhood leadership, we decided to go this path. On another project, we have 4 bedrooms. So it depends a little bit on the profile of the individual project.
Now, Sarah, you've been waiting so patiently, but you know, as you can see, we're pretty informal, but we're about real talk here, and even more importantly, real action. So you could have chimed in at any point, Sarah. But thank you for waiting so patiently. So, but Sarah, I got to break the ice with you because, again, we're real talk here, and so you're here representing the Fifeville Neighborhood Association. So you realize that some of our viewers are going to see this and be like, "Now we heard all the data that Aaron said. Now Sarah, is not a person of color, by the looks of things. So, but you're representing, right. So you're representing the Fifeville Neighborhood Association. So, so I want you to speak on your role there, and and the insight that you can provide, when it comes to that being a representative of the neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I moved to the neighborhood in 2010. I had moved to Charlottesville in 2007. And I moved to Fifeville because I had been involved with Charlottesville Abundant Life Ministry. So I'd been working with kids and families in the neighborhood for a while. And when I finished up at UVA, I felt like I wanted to move into a community where there was a real sense of community, where I knew people, and where I could just begin to start my adult life. So I was about 25 when I moved to Fifeville in 2010, and have been there ever since. It's been a really lovely place for me to be. And I really appreciate that you started out by acknowledging that I'm not a person of color. I'm not part of the Black majority of the neighborhood, but I have been engaged with community development for a long time in the community, starting with working with kids programs at Abundant Life. And then ultimately in 2015, I started coming to neighborhood association meetings. And I started coming because I heard through my neighbors that there was a hullabaloo going on about the new hotel that was getting built on Cherry Avenue. And so I decided to come and see what was going on, and really got the opportunity to become a part of the larger conversation around displacement in our community. And so I've been at the neighborhood since then, serving in a variety of roles. Currently, I'm the vice president. Our president is Carmelita Wood, who is African-American and who has been fearlessly leading this conversation for a long time.
Yeah, and we plan to have her on eventually too, right?
We hope. She's at church, but she did.
She provided a quote, right?
She did.
Yeah.
So we've got Miss Carmelita is so busy.
You mind reading her statement?
Yeah, I mean, if you're or Max maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yes, this is Ms. Carmelita, the president
Sure.
of the Fifeville Neighborhood Association.
yeah, and Carmelita and Sarah, to my lens, have worked really closely together. So Carmelita seemed comfortable with Sarah representing on the air today. But Ms. Carmelita says, Fifeville was once a thriving Black community. Over the years, it has changed, and now it is a very diverse community. Children of the elderly who moved away, or parents pasted on moved away and sold the homes, and some have become rentals, and some were fixer-uppers and sold for a huge profit. This has increased property values and taxes, which some residents couldn't afford to stay in Fifeville. In trying to stop this from continuing to happen, putting something in place between developers, neighborhood leaders, and residents, like the Memorandum of Understanding, which we'll talk about, the Neighborhood Association, along with the other parties, believed that the MOU would be an additional piece of the puzzle in helping to stop displacement in Fifeville. This agreement is a way to capture the neighborhood's vision for our community, to provide community building, and to hold all parties involved accountable to its commitment to the community. My hope is that in the future, as more development in Fifeville comes about, that we as an association can form more partnerships with whatever businesses and organizations to do whatever we can to make sure that all of our visions in the small area plan are met to benefit the community and stay true to our residents.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
what she's talking about there, and this is something that I definitely want Sarah to talk about, because Sarah played a huge role in this along with Miss Carmelita. The site we've been talking about is the old Estes IGA, right? That's the 501 Cherry Avenue project. It's right across from Tonsler Park. It's right next to La Flor Michoacana, the paleta shop, which now I'm hungry. But it's right there, right? And that's such a busy corridor. People drive by it all the time. And that grocery store, that building, was once such a hub of community for the Fifeville neighborhood, from what I've heard from plenty of folks, from, Miss Marcia, Miss Durenda, all the way down to Tron Jackson, who's 19 years old, and told me about his memories of going there with his grandma. So it's, it was such a staple. So that's the area that we're talking about. And what we're talking about is, as Sunshine said, a multi-use development with, fingers crossed, a grocery store, music resource center, and twice as nice, with apartments on the 2 floors above those. So, and that the project has come together with the efforts of, so Woodard Properties owns that property.
Okay.
And they already had a relationship with the Neighborhood Association from working on the Fifeville Trail project, which wrapped up about a year ago. So they had already been chatting a lot with Carmelita and Sarah and other folks in the neighborhood. And then they were trying to kind of reach an agreement. Like, the Neighborhood Association was, trying to stand up and say, hey, we know that you own this now. Can we do something good for the neighborhood with this? Like, the association was trying to give the neighborhood a say. And Woodard was like, yeah, let's do it. So they've been working on this kind of plan, but then they couldn't figure out a housing part. And that's how PHA got involved. But
makes sense.
They've entered into this agreement called are you ready? Memorandum of Understanding, Community Benefits Agreement, MOU, CBA. The agreement is what I would call it. But
the agreement.
Sarah's the one who brought this idea to everyone, because Sarah's a certified planner. So she's got background in this. She's also very modest and would not take credit for this, but everyone told me it was Sarah's idea to do this type of agreement. So she had heard about this and brought it up. And Sarah, I think you could tell us kind of from there how that developed, because this agreement, I talked to the guy who did the Staples Center, one of these, where the Lakers play and everything. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, these things happen with a real estate, private developer agreeing to give a neighborhood a say happens a couple of times a year in the entire country. So this is rare, not just for Charlottesville, but for anywhere in the U.S. And it's happening in Fifeville. They've signed this agreement. It's Woodard, the private developer, PHA, nonprofit developer, and the Neighborhood Association. So Sarah can can tell us a little more about that kind of agreement.
Yeah, and sir, before you do that too, tell us the makeup of the neighborhood association.
The makeup of the neighborhood association.
Yeah, as far as people, you know what I mean. I'm curious about that. Yeah, where the leadership is it truly representative of the spectrum that's of the neighborhood?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We're a very small group. In the time that I've been attending the neighborhood association meetings since about 2015, it's been about half and half, African American and white folks attending, and it's mostly most of the time it's seniors attending. I'm one of the younger folks who attends. I'm 39, and so we do have a couple of younger folks who come up every now and then. But I would say, in terms of being representative of neighborhood demographics, we're probably a little bit underrepresented on African American participants. And there's a longer story looking back that I'd be happy to chat about on another show. Because the neighborhood association did used to be a Black-led, Black-dominated neighborhood association. Okay. And so that's been a shift. And my knowledge of that shift only goes back to about 2015, but it certainly is a part of the story of power dynamics in the city of Charlottesville. And that's a big piece of what we've been thinking about as a neighborhood association and as a leadership, is trying to bring back the power to community voice, particularly the historic and generational families in the community, as well as the young people who you can imagine not many young people come to a neighborhood association meeting, but we want to make sure that their voices are included too, in terms of assessing what's needed in the community and sharing their vision for how they think those needs could be met.
Gotcha. Now, if you all don't mind, since we're up against the hour, can we take a quick break and then we'll come back and you can share your thoughts on the MOU, and then make sure that Sunshine and Aaron have, sort of to make sure that you all close this with what you think is most pertinent today, and we'll see what Max has as well. So since we're up against the hour, we're going to take a quick break and come right back with Sarah of the Fifeville Neighborhood Association, Sunshine of the Piedmont Housing Alliance, and Aaron, Charlottesville Tomorrow. Sir Charles is Miss Max. Stay tuned. We're talking Cherry Ave, Fifeville. IMHO Talk Show. Back like we never left. Sir Charles, Miss Max, joined by none other than our family from Charlottesville Tomorrow, Aaron O'Hare, and Sunshine Mathon of Piedmont Housing Alliance, Sarah Malpass of Fifeville Neighborhood Association, talking about the development in Fifeville neighborhood on Cherry Avenue. And for those of us from here, talking about the old IGA. All right, let's make it clear. And
I just say that at first.
Yeah.
And I was trying to be professional, but so where we left off, we wanted to come back because the hour just wasn't quite enough. We wanted to make sure that everybody had their closing comments, what folks need to know moving forward. And as we said, we will have residents on with us talking from both sides, and we want to have city leaders and folks on as well when it comes to with the overarching view looks for for this landscape, what that means to the city. So Sarah, I want to go back to you because we had a question during the break. Also, you were going to touch on what the MOU means that Aaron introduced, but so you could tackle either one in order you choose, the question or the MOU.
Great. Well, I'll start with this. This is a great question from one of the viewers or listeners today. They asked what would be a good number of Black folks for adequate representation in the neighborhood association. I think it's a great question. It's one we've struggled with since I've been a part of the neighborhood association. And to some extent, I think it really depends on what you're looking for in terms of representation or what you think representation means. So if you look at the current demographics of the neighborhood, it's 55% African American. And so if that's your standard for representation, then we should have a little over half of our members who are Black. But I think for me,
is it the case when the majority of it sounds like anyway, that the majority of the Black people that live in that neighborhood are renting?
Well, we don't know if they're renters or I haven't dug that deep. Okay.
Yeah, I think we do have a majority renters, but Aaron hasn't analyzed that by race. But what was your question? Could you restate that?
She was answering yours.
Oh, no. Was it my question or Max's question?
Well, we don't have.
Oh, Max. Sorry, I thought Max was asking a
Oh,
question.
yeah. So you answered it. Yeah, because she was saying that we would need the rest of that data.
Yeah. But so to go back to the representation question, I think another way to look at representation is to think about power dynamics and to think about who built a neighborhood. And so for me personally, I think given the history of the neighborhood and the Black leadership that really built the core of the community and the Black leadership that continues to lead today, that we ideally would have higher representation than we do in our Thursday night meetings. I would say that we're close to 50-50, depending on which night folks choose to show up. But I'd like to see it go higher. And to that extent, the community, the neighborhood association has done a lot of thinking about how do we make sure if it's not convenient for folks or they don't want to come on Thursday nights, how do we get out and make sure that the neighborhood association is gathering opinions and insights directly from our residents to make sure that what we are pushing for and what we are advocating for really reflects those perspectives. And so we have for years, when we have done our key decision-making around vision for the neighborhood, around where the neighborhood association puts our time and energy, we go out into the community. We go to places like the mosque, like Abundant Life. We do front porch conversations. And so that's a way that we have sought to really try to acknowledge that disparity and address and make sure that the things that we are pushing for are truly representative and coming from the plethora, the diversity of neighborhood residents that we have.
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate, because it's crucial. And Sarah, full transparency, like I see it so many times, and thank you for the good work that you're doing. But so many times, especially when you talk about the younger Black demographic that doesn't appear to be present when it comes to a lot of the action that's taking place for representation within the neighborhood association. It happens so many times, but I understand to a certain extent, because a lot of us are jaded. Like a lot of us have trauma from the past that makes us believe that things are just going to be what they are. There's no way I can change it, or things are going to get worse because we don't have the economic power, whatever the case is. But like I feel I always do, I'm calling out to my kinfolk, to my people in particular, to say that you have to be present. We have to be present. And I mean, because the only other choice is you giving up hope. You can't give up hope. You got to believe that future generations, current generation is a new generation doing it a new way. And we got to form these bonds and these unions to leave things better and to have a voice and a say. Because I hear you talking about the seniors, which is great. And I hear you talking about others, but the seniors, fact of the matter is, they're not going to be here for generations to come. Our elders. So we got to represent if we want stake in our communities.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering about the assessment of whether or not the feedback that you do receive from the Black people of the community is actually being incorporated into the various projects or initiatives that you all are working on, because that matters. If they feel like their voice is going to go unheard or it won't be worthwhile anyway, then the person has to weigh, is it worth my time?
Yeah, thank you. That's at the heart of the work that we are trying to do with the Neighborhood Association. We started in 2015 doing community surveys soon after the hotel broke ground on Cherry Avenue. We knew folks were really upset and worried about displacement in the community, worried about the future of services like the laundromat on Cherry Avenue. And so we went door to door through the neighborhood with that survey, and ultimately came up with a vision that we put together that was really reflective of all of the feedback that we got. I live on the Prospect side of the neighborhood, and so I went door to door in our side of the neighborhood, which is composed of a variety of folks, from homeowners to renters to folks who have subsidized housing in what's currently called Greenstone. But we really worked to put together a vision that was reflective of that input and reflective of the history of African-American leadership building the neighborhood. So the vision that we have for the community is that it's a vibrant mixed-use area on Cherry Avenue, and that development on Cherry Avenue will respect and preserve the history and culture of the neighborhood, specifically that African-American history and culture. and that new development and investment that comes on Cherry Avenue and throughout the neighborhood would be something that contributes to a sense of community rather than pushing people apart, brings folks together, and is accessible and welcoming to folks at all ends of the socioeconomic spectrum, but particularly to folks who are at the lowest end. There has really been a heart in this community for making sure that there is a place for everyone to live. And so that's a vision that we put together with input from folks across the neighborhood and that we took to the city through their small area planning process that we did. That vision got adopted by the city in 2021. And that's the standard which developers like Woodard Properties have to meet when they come into our community. Right. And so that's what led us into a conversation ultimately with Woodard Properties about putting together a community benefits agreement. We wanted to make sure that there was a written agreement where the community had the power to express what we needed and what would be meaningful to us in terms of development at that site.
Gotcha. Now, the MOU, did you have any other thoughts on the MOU or are we good there? We covered that.
I can just share that it's a, oh, I'm sorry. Did you mean me?
Yeah. Oh, yes. If you have anything to add.
Yeah, I can just share that it's a tool that's used in development projects across the country. Usually, as Aaron said, it's used at really large development projects. I had some experience working to support one. Back in 2019, I worked with a community group that was majority people of color, and they were advocating for anti-displacement measures around the Port of Seattle. And so I had experience working to support a community group advocating for themselves in that kind of process at work. And I wanted to see if we could use that to be a meaningful tool here in Charlottesville. And so when Anthony Woodard and Woodard Properties came to us and shared that they had purchased the site, we knew that this was one of the critical sites in the neighborhood. It's a site that has incredible emotional and historic resonance for folks in terms of just being the place that families used to go to get their groceries, to see and be seen, and to be a part of the community. And so for us, that particular site was really important to make sure the developer got it right. And we were lucky that we had a relationship with the developer who purchased that property and that they were, in fact, really willing and eager to work with us.
Gotcha. Thank you. And as we kind of loop back around, Sarah, anything that you wanted to leave with our listeners when it comes to maybe ask of the community from the Fifeville Neighborhood Association or any last comments?
Thanks. Well, I'll just mention that we focused a lot on housing in this conversation, but the community benefits agreement is really quite a bit more broad than housing. We have economic development aspects to the agreement. We have things related to the community's history and culture. And so we're really hoping that holistically, this development will be a process where folks can really see themselves represented. And to that end, I guess my ask would be our next Fifeville Neighborhood Association meeting is December 14th. That's a Thursday. We meet the second Thursday every month at the Tonsler Park Community Center. Our meetings start at 6:15. And this particular month, we are having a design session. Folks from Woodard Properties, from Piedmont Housing Alliance, and from the architect firm that they're working with will be there. It'll be our third of 3 design meetings. So members of the community have already been coming out and getting involved and having a say in what they would like the building to look like, how they would like it to feel, and integrate into the surrounding properties and neighborhood. But we really hope that folks will come out on Thursday, December 14th at 6:15 p.m. for our third conversation with the developers, and that's at Tonsler Park. So I hope to see you guys there.
Thank you. Thank y'all for scheduling at a decent time and not just times where, like the people involved and the seniors can meet, because people will be trying to sneak that on you. Y'all know they
do. And we meet every month. So come on out, whether it's this coming December meeting or starting in the new year. We'd love to see you.
Mm-hmm. Some listeners may be interested, and I don't know if you were releasing this information, but the name of the particular developer that you all have decided to go with on this project. So I guess that's my first question. The next is, Aaron alluded to it. Well, she's mentioned it earlier in the interview, and in your recent comments, it sounds like the design of the project is still ongoing. And so I guess I'm just wondering whether or not there are any things that might prohibit the project from fully becoming what you guys envision for it being in terms of the number of units, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
And then the last thing is, I'm sure this project would then have to go before the Planning Commission and ultimately City Council to then even be approved. So there's a few, I know we're talking about what it's going to be, but I guess there's a few hurdles that we still have yet to jump before we see what it actually becomes or is.
I'm sure Sunshine has something to add to that too. And you may as well, Sarah, but that may be a good nod to Sunshine.
Well, I'll start on the last question there. So some of that approval stuff has already taken place. So in fact, it already has been in front of Planning Commission and City Council and has gotten the rezoning that it needs to move forward. But there is, this gets at the second question, which is what do we still need to see this project happen? And frankly, it's this is the nonprofit developer in me, but we need the funding. Like we can't do this without the subsidy to reach those depths of affordability. And those decisions have not been made yet. We've made good progress in conversations with city staff and city leadership, and they are nodding in the right direction, but no final decisions have been made yet. And that's a key area where we need everyone's voice to lift up and support the funding that's necessary to make the project happen.
Awesome.
And that funding, that city funding, sorry, last thing, Charles. That city funding is not the funding for the entire project. That's a key, but it's a key part of the funding. That funding leverages all the other state and federal sources that come in. They want to see the local investment first, and then that opens up everything else.
And I think Max's first question was, what developer you're working with, right? We didn't, that was the other question.
Yeah, I'll just respond quickly and Sarah jump in. But it's actually the property is owned by Woodard Properties. They are the owner. There's actually the neighborhood doesn't have any say in that. We don't have any say in that. They own the property. So they're the for-profit entity engaged, and then they've engaged with us at Piedmont Housing Alliance to be the nonprofit affordable housing developer. Those are the two developer organizations involved.
Gotcha.
The BRW is the architect.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's the question in architect. Okay.
And I think something that Sarah touched on a little bit about the agreement is it really is so much more than just the like, this is how many units of housing and this is how affordable they'll be. And the story that I wrote on the agreement is quite long, but I think because there's so much there, it is hopefully worth a read for folks on the Charlottesville Tomorrow site. But it includes things like, you know, Woodard and PHA will hire from the neighborhood whenever they can for these projects, for staff, for those sorts of things. So, and that's just one of many, many, many things that's in there. It involves the level of community engagement that they have to have. It's not just, you know, like it's not just one meeting and done. It's ongoing. It's multiple design meetings. It's all of that. So
We've seen that go wrong.
well, exactly. We sure have, which is why like it's so unique that it's for Charlottesville, that it's written down in the agreement. And like if Woodard or PHA doesn't do it, like not only the neighborhood association, but everyone in the public, because it's a public document now, it's in the city council packet. They could be like, excuse me, hey, remember you said this. Like the accountability that the agreement brings to the project is really unprecedented for a private developer, especially in Charlottesville. So it's super interesting. I would if people have some chunks of time, I would encourage them to read this story. It's, you know, could get some ideas cooking, as city manager Sam Sanders kind of brought up in that housing conversation. People are looking at it. Yeah.
Cultural competency, you know, is something that at every level, association, the alliance, the property owners, the developer, the architect, keep on going down the line, like that has to constantly be the push, be the expectation of that you're going to have cultural competency. You know, because without that, then like there's always ways to work. There's always loopholes to find to get over on people if their history is not known and appreciated. But
true, so true.
So
accountability.
Yeah. So so as we said, thank you for pitching it in the beginning. We're gonna have another Can I Talk to You Cville series come up last Thursday of January. So y'all stay tuned for that. But want to thank Sarah and Sunshine as well for joining us today. Always a pleasure. Sunshine, Sarah, nice to meet you. And so Aaron, maybe give you the last words in regards to make sure that you close out this section of the story and let folks know, kind of what to expect next in this conversation.
Sure. So thank you again also to Sarah, to Sunshine, and to Carmelita for taking the time to type this up. She's always on the go. Everyone wants her time. So I'm grateful that she took the time to do that and to talk to me for the story as well. So I would just encourage folks who are curious. You don't have to read it all at once. You can read it in chunks. To go online to cvilletomorrow.org to find the story. Fifeville residents got a say in a private developer's plans by making an unusual agreement. Goes through a lot of history. The residents' perspectives are so crucial to this. So we will have them on in a future episode, along with some city leaders who could talk big picture about what can Charlottesville learn from this, and how could it or not be a model going forward? I think that's a really complicated question that I try to answer in the story. But one thing that was great about this for me from an equity kind of community-based reporting standpoint is to have all of those perspectives in there, to talk to the neighborhood, to talk to the people who are being affected, who are most affected, as well as the folks making the decisions. And it's nice when those two groups kind of dovetail, right?
That's right.
So the power of the neighborhood is something that I really wanted to emphasize in this, because folks are speaking out. It's not just the neighborhood association. It's people going to the meetings and saying, here's my experience. This is my perspective. This is what I want. This is what I don't want. And there's been a lot of that. So it's really exciting to see people exercise their voices in that way. So, and then keep, you can subscribe to our newsletter to get more, because this will not be the last story I write about this. Poor Sarah and Sunshine are going to have to talk to me many more times after this, not just about this project, but thanks to the dozen plus people I talked to for the story. And I'm looking forward to the next segments.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Aaron. Keep up the good work.
I am H.O. Talk Show.